All right, we're going. Welcome, everybody. We did it. This is week 30, I think. Isn't that crazy? We've been doing this for a long time. And eventually, you guys will mix up your seats and sit somewhere uniquely different. I now know how to see if you're here because I look to where you sit, and I'll see if you're absent. We've covered quite a bit of ground in the last week and a half. Starting today, we're going to read the book of Daniel. So what I thought we would do this morning is we're not really going to talk about Esther or Joel. We're going to talk about the book of Daniel. And the reason for that is, although I think sometimes people scratch their head with both Esther and Joel, there's usually not weird interpretations of those books. Usually it's just how do I interpret this book? But with Daniel, I think sometimes we can miss the point, and it's a really awesome book. It's kind of like the capstone project of the Old Testament, where it is riffing off of so many themes before. This book is the jazz song of the Old Testament that is pulling all these riffs from earlier books and putting it all into one narrative and one book of vision. So we'll talk about it. Many people have created maps time maps based off of the book of Daniel. I watched many videos of people doing it this weekend, and I was scratching my head, just how in the world are you getting there? So we'll just read through it and we'll talk together. Let me pray for it first, and then we'll dive into stuff. Father, thank you for this morning, and thank you that your mercies are new every day, and every morning we are a new creation in Christ. And God, it's not because of anything that we have done, but because of your work and your promises that you were faithful to fulfill in Christ through his life, death, and resurrection. So God, we trust in Jesus as our perfection, as our righteousness, as the payment for our sin and as our life. And God, help us now see you and see Christ more clearly and more fully through the Old Testament, to see how you pointed forward to these better promises that we now have secured by Jesus. We love you and we need you. Pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. So before we dive into Daniel, how did reading go on Esther? Good? Bad? How do you guys feel about Esther? Was that a book that you're this is a really fun read? Or were you I don't really actually know what I'm reading in this book? Let's hear from you. Morgan, what do you think?
I thought it was awesome.
You thought it was awesome? Why did you think it was awesome?
I thought it was kind of a good break because I could read it and really envision what was going on. And it just so action.
Yeah.
And fun. And yeah. So it was a good break. I like it.
Nice. I think that's how the book is supposed to feel when you read it. It's a good job. Yeah, Mike?
I was looking forward to this time because I read, like many of us, I've read the book several times.
Uh-huh.
But this time I was for focus on evidence of Jesus. Where was that evidence?
Mm-hmm.
One spot in the story that really stood out to me was that point when Mordecai realized that he had been empowered to go out and speak to people and tell them that things were going to be okay. They were going to be able to overpower them.
Mm-hmm.
How did he know that?
Yeah. Nice. Good stuff. Other reflections from Esther? Yeah.
Just love how God's timing behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of that was not created by anyone but the Lord.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I really like Esther, her willingness. She's going to fast, complete fast for 3 days,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'll go into the king and perish.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a martyr thing or anything. It's I'm willing to do this. And even though there's no mention of God or Jesus, my interpretation, my life is
Yeah.
and he will ultimately.
Yeah, God and Yahweh never mentioned in the book. Even when she does the fast, she doesn't say, I'm going to fast so that we can pray. She just says, I'm going to fast. And throughout church history, some have viewed it as the secular book. This is just how the Jewish people were existing secularly and distant from God. But I think any honest reading, you're oh, this is clearly a book about providence and God, how God is faithful to his people, even in the gray zones of their moral decisions and away from the promised land and away from the temple. There's an entire other program going on with Ezra Nehemiah, and yet there's still people in Susa who God is protecting and caring for. So, a book about providence for sure. Any other reflections you guys want to share? Ben, your beard's looking really good, by the way. Yeah. So thinking about how does that book point to Christ, you do have Jesus' words in the end of the book of Luke, in Luke 24. Then he opened their minds to understand the scriptures, and he said to them, "Thus it is written," or in this way, scripture speaks, is more literally what this is saying. And he's giving a summary of the Old Testament, that the Christ should suffer, and on the third day rise from the dead, and that repentance for the forgiveness of sins should be proclaimed in his name to all the nations, beginning from Jerusalem. So Jesus' thesis statement of what the Old Testament is about is he's saying the entire Old Testament has this structure about the Messiah. It's showing these patterns of the Messiah suffering to the point of death or going down to a pit, and then on the third day rising from the dead for salvation for people. And like, what is the book of Esther about except for someone who goes into a very dangerous situation where they might perish, and all of it is taking place on the third day, right? On the third day, Esther goes into the king's chamber, and that's when she has the discussion to save the people. So she fasts for 3 days, and then she goes in on the third day, and that's when she saves the people as a Jew who's exalted in a foreign court. And she brings liberation to the people. And it's awesome. It's epic. The entire book also, hopefully you watched the video, it has a really awesome symmetrical design. So the entire book pivots on chapter 6, where a reversal happens. Remember, there's Haman, and he's like, you know, King Ahasuerus, if you really want to honor someone, give them your royal robe and set them on a horse and parade them around the city and make everyone bow down. And then King Ahasuerus is like, that sounds fantastic. Go do that to Mordecai. And then everything reverses from that point on. So from chapter 1 to chapter 6, it's this progression leading up to Mordecai Haman trying to kill not only Mordecai, but all the Jews. And then everything pivots starting in chapter 6. And everything after chapter 6 reflects and reverses what you read from chapter 1 to chapter 6. So the book itself has this down progression into the pit of death, and then this exaltation pattern of Mordecai in a foreign court. Never mentions God, never mentions Yahweh, and yet the design of the book is of this Esther, royal figure, who's exalted and saves her people in a foreign nation. Pretty cool. And I wonder why Jesus would say stuff like, the Old Testament is about the Messiah, how he should suffer, and on the third day rise, stuff like this. So this is one of those third day texts that we talked about weeks ago. Remember I said look for third day texts? What about from the book of Joel? Any reflections from Joel? Yes.
I want you to address the chapter 2, verse 10.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Before class.
Yes, great. Yes, okay. So the whole book of Joel, it reflects backwards on a day of the Lord, and it talks about these locusts coming in. We have no time marker for the book of Joel. There are some things that, like, well, maybe we can think about the locust. Maybe it was an actual swarm of locusts. But as I pointed out in the email, throughout the Bible, locust is a metaphor for foreign armies who come and invade the people. And just like a locust swarm can come in and devour your crops and devour your land, well, so do foreign occupiers who come in and sweep through the land. So it looks back in chapter 1 to a day of the Lord, a day when God intervenes and acts in a definitive way in human history to bring judgment or to bring salvation or both. And then chapter 2 is looking forward to another day of the Lord. Like, just like that day, there's going to be another day that's going to come, and that day is going to be a final day. There's going to be an ultimate and final day of the Lord, a day when God intervenes and acts definitively in human history to bring about judgment and salvation. And the way it's described in chapter 2, verse 10, is that the earth is going to quake before them, the heavens are going to tremble, the sun and the moon are going to be darkened, and the stars are going to withdraw from their shining. This is actually a pretty common way that the prophets talk about God's judgment. It's reflecting on the cosmic order and saying, basically, all of the cosmos are going to break down and stop working. There's going to be that cosmic decay because God is going to intervene and do something. And Jesus picks up these words in Matthew 24:29. We're going to jump there. This whole chapter is an apocalyptic chapter. Oftentimes people go here to see to say that Jesus is talking about the tribulation and the second coming of Jesus. We're going to get to Matthew, so we'll talk about this chapter eventually. But here in verse 29, he says, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. It's like, where do you get that? That's a quote right from the book of Joel chapter 2. So if we just get to this chapter, we think, yes, okay, so Jesus is saying that one day he's going to return, it's going to be after a tribulation, and then all these things are going to happen. Like the sun's going to stop shining, the moon's not going to give light, and stars are going to fall out of heaven. However, we're actually going to read this again in the book of Matthew. When Jesus is being crucified, as they went out, let's go to the death. Now from the 6th hour, there was darkness over the land until the 9th hour. When Jesus is being crucified, the sun stops giving its light. There's only 2 times in the Bible that there's darkness over the land. It's in the book of Exodus, during the 10th plague, the death of the firstborn. And then when Jesus is crucified, there's darkness over the land, the death of the firstborn. There's darkness over the land till the 9th hour. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani. That is, my God, why have you forsaken me? And some of the bystanders, hearing it, said, this man is calling for Elijah. And one of them at once ran and took a sponge filled with sour wine and put it on the reed and gave it to him to drink. But the others said, wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to save him. And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. And behold, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook. There was an earthquake, and the rocks split. And you get another mention in verse 54, when the centurion and those who were with him, keeping watch over Jesus, saw the earthquake. So you have a mention in the crucifixion of Jesus and the death of Jesus that the sun stops giving light, and the earth shook. This is the day of the Lord. This is when God acts in a definitive way in human history to bring about judgment on sin and to bring about salvation for his people. This is it. So the reference of Matthew 24, what Jesus is really talking about, like the first thing he's talking about is his own death and destruction, and he's using all the images from Joel chapter 2 to talk about his own death. That's when God saves his people. And the ultimate picture in the book of Joel, when we get to the end of the book, was that the Lord dwells in Zion, that God will dwell with his people. Jesus' life, death, and resurrection is ultimately so that God would dwell in the midst of his people globally. So Jesus was Emmanuel, God with us, and then he yields up his spirit, and on the day of Pentecost, he gives his spirit to the people, and now God dwells in us. So here is God dwelling in the midst of his people. So that was the Joel 2:10 stuff. It's pretty cool. I think it's cool. Joel 2 also gets picked up. So right after that, in verse 28, it shall come to pass afterward that I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, your old men shall dream dreams, and your young men shall see visions. Even on the male and female servants, in those days I will pour out my spirit. So think about Joel chapter 2. This is all one long prophetic poem about the day of the Lord. We know the day of the Lord is going to come when the sun stops giving light and there's an earthquake. And then what God's going to do is he's going to pour his spirit out on people. Well, 50 days after Jesus' crucifixion and his resurrection, we have Acts chapter 2, the day of Pentecost, and Peter gets up and he gives his sermon. He starts like this. This is what was uttered through the prophet Joel. And in the last days, the end of days, in the eschaton, these are the last days. In the last days it shall be, God declares, that I will pour out my spirit on all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall see dreams. So he's quoting all from the book of Joel right there. And then he gets here to the end. Men of Israel, hear these words. Jesus of Nazareth, a man attested to you by God with mighty works and wonders and signs that God did through him in your midst. As yourselves know, this Jesus, delivered up according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God. You crucified him by killing by the hands of lawless men. God raised him up, loosing the pangs of death, because it was not possible for him to be held by it. And then he goes on. All of this, though, is stemming from one question that is asked. There's the people, and they're speaking tongues. They're speaking other foreign languages. And some people are like, wow, this is incredible. And other people start mocking, and they say, what does this mean? And others are saying, they must be drunk. So there's this question. What does this mean? They hear people, they see people, followers of Jesus, speaking unknown languages to them. They're speaking foreign languages. And these foreigners who have traveled to Jerusalem for Pentecost, which is a pilgrimage festival, they hear Ben speaking French. And they're like, Ben never took a French class. How is he speaking French? And like some people are like, he must be drunk. And other people are like, what does this mean? So then Peter stands up and he quotes from the book of Joel. And he says, you're seeing this fulfilled. This is being fulfilled. So Joel 2 has been fulfilled is the argument of Acts chapter 2. And I think it's the argument that Matthew is presenting in how he portrays the crucifixion and the death of Jesus. Joel 2 has been fulfilled. And we are waiting for the bow to be closed. But it is here. All right, you want to talk about Daniel? Let's do it.
Question on Joel.
Yeah.
3:17 about no foreigners invading Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
Is that absolute?
Yeah, what has been the means of God's judgment throughout the Old Testament? He hands his people over to foreign oppressors. He allows Assyria or Egypt or Babylon, foreign oppressors, to come in and to wipe them out. And God's saying, that's not going to happen again. There's not going to be another exile. It's going to be finished. It's going to be concluded. You're not going to be invaded by other people and taken out. So I think that's what that's meaning there. Does that make sense? Kind of? Not convinced by it?
Pardon?
Not convinced by it?
No.
You don't have to be. Strangers shall never again pass through it. Let's see. Whatever the other references. Remember in Ezra Nehemiah, there kept being those mentions that the people would celebrate Passover and those who separated themselves from the nations. So there was this emphasis also in the book of Ezra and Nehemiah that there were foreigners in the assembly, but it was foreigners who had separated from the practices of the other nations who were dedicated to Yahweh. So the strangers it's not that it's just focused on someone who's not a Jew, but someone who worships another God. So there's going to be a purity of the covenant people. Is that convincing? All right. I'll keep thinking of ways to convince you of it. Yeah. Keep asking questions of it too. All right, let's talk about Daniel. We haven't watched the video yet, unless you already did this morning. Props to you. The book of Daniel, its design is brilliant and also really complicated. I should just pull up a picture of the poster. Let's see. Daniel Bible Project. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not very helpful. Maybe. It's not helpful either. Come on. Maybe this takes me to a page. Visit? Yeah, that's pretty good. Okay, so chapter 1 and chapters 8 through 12 are written in Hebrew. Chapters 2 through 7, though, are written in Aramaic, which is like a sister language. Actually, if you've ever seen the language of Hebrew written, this script, the way the letters are written, this block script, they take it from Babylon. And these are actually Aramaic script letters. So it's using basically Aramaic letters to write Hebrew words. And that happened because people were taken into exile and they lived in Babylon for over 70 plus years. So they were adapting to the language, and the trade language throughout the known world of the time was Aramaic. Aramaic is very similar to Hebrew. These are Aramaic letters, but Hebrew words. But in the book of Daniel, you have Hebrew, then Hebrew, and then these chapters are in Aramaic. The thing that makes it more interesting, like, well, why is it broken down like that, is because there's 12 chapters, very clearly 12 chapters, and chapter 1 through 6 are all narrative stories, but then chapters 7 through 12 are all visions and dreams. So it's not actually a smooth division of the language with the content. It's not like all the stories are in Hebrew, then all the visions are in Aramaic. So there's these two design patterns going on in the book. And people have proposed various interpretations for why that is. Like maybe chapter 1 and chapters 8 through 12 are really focused and deal with the people of Israel and what's going to happen in the land, so that's why they're in Hebrew. While these stories all take place and deal with Babylon or the location of Babylon, that's why it's in Aramaic. I'm not entirely convinced by that. We've also read Ezra Nehemiah, and in Ezra, there's a huge chunk of it that's in Aramaic. It just switches halfway through the story, and then you're reading in Aramaic. We don't know that because it's all in English. And then it just switches back to Hebrew. So other biblical authors do this at times. But that's a design pattern. But then when we get into chapter 2 through 7, there is a chiasm where if we think about chapter 4 and 5, the beloved stories of Nebuchadnezzar becoming a beast of the field where he's eating grass, and then there's the hand that shows up in the second story with Belshazzar, and it writes Mene, Mene, Tekel, something like that. Parson, nice. And both of those stories are these stories about kings, and there's all these key words that are used about it. In the story of Nebuchadnezzar, he humbles himself, and then he's exalted again. Belshazzar doesn't humble himself, so he dies. So those two stories mirror each other. Then you have the stories in chapter 3, chapter 6 of the friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're thrown into the fiery furnace because they're not willing to bow down to a statue of the king. So they're thrown into the furnace. They're thrown into the pit of death. And then God delivers them from death, and they're exalted out of the pit, and they're established over all of Babylon as the rulers of the province of Babylon. On the other side, chapter 6 is about Daniel specifically. And you know what he won't do? He won't stop bowing down to his God. He will keep praying, even though the king has proclaimed an edict that people need to worship him for a month. So Daniel continues to bow down to his God, and because of that, he gets thrown into a pit of death. Except for it's not a pit of fire, it's a pit of lions. And then God miraculously delivers Daniel from the pit of death, and he's exalted up out of it. And then what happens is he's set up over all the province of Babylon, except for now it's under Cyrus. Chapter 2, chapter 7, they mirror each other because in chapter 2, it's the king's dream, and he has this dream about the statue where the head is gold, like the chest is silver, and then it's bronze, and then it's iron. And the interpretation of the dream as we look at it is about these 4 kingdoms. The head is the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, and then there's going to be these 4 kingdoms that follow the king of Babylon. And he's troubled by his dream, but thankfully Daniel is there to give an interpretation. Chapter 7 is about Daniel's dream, and Daniel can't interpret the dream. And he's like, what does this mean? It's this dream about these beasts that come up out of the sea and have bones in their mouth and they're crushing things in their jaw. And then there's the Son of Man exalted up to the Ancient of Days. And he's like, what does this mean? And then an angel comes and interprets his dream for him. And what's the interpretation? There's going to be 4 kingdoms that are going to follow each other. And so it's about the same content, except for this one is the king's dream and Daniel interprets it. This one is Daniel's dream and he needs someone to interpret it. So this has a symmetrical pattern in it, the chapters 2 through chapter 7. Chapter 1 kind of sets up the story about Daniel and his friends, and the entire book is surrounded around one pivotal thing. When's God going to act? And what do we do in the meantime? And what we'll actually see at the end, when we get to chapter 12, the conclusion that Daniel is given is, it is going to happen. Just wait. Keep waiting, keep being faithful. So the entire book shows you, how do you do it? How do you be faithful in the time of faithlessness? Well, you be like Daniel and his friends. You be like the exalted Son of Man, who is the Holy One. So that's how the design of the book is functioning. Now we're just going to dive in and look at some of these stories. Sound good? Okay. How's the coffee this morning, Ben?
It was very tasty.
Good. Okay, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. This is what happened in 605 BC. So this is the first wave of exile. That's when Daniel is taken. The Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with some of the vessels of the house of God. You should remember that because that'll come into play in a later story. Some of the vessels of the house of God. And brought them to the land of Shinar. What's the land of Shinar? It's Babylon. But we haven't really heard it be called Shinar in a very long time. You remember the first time we hear Babylon called the land of Shinar? Oh yeah, way back in Genesis chapter 11. Remember when people are building a tower up to the heavens? A tower of Babel, aka Babylon, and they're doing it in the plains of Shinar. Yeah. So right away, you have this little link to this story, because usually that word's not used. But the author of Daniel, maybe Daniel himself or someone telling you the stories of Daniel, is linking all these stories back to a very early story of Genesis chapter 11, where God came down and he humbled the proud, and then he scattered them. So in the land of Shinar, he brought the vessels to the house of his God and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. Then the king commanded Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, to bring some of the people of Israel. What's a eunuch? Ben, what's a eunuch? Tell the class.
A eunuch was a court servant or worker who was castrated to prevent getting the queen pregnant.
There you go, nice. Someone who has been castrated or was born that way but works for the royal court. And he was told to bring some of the people of Israel, both the royal family and the nobility. So he's going to bring them in. He's going to establish them to work in the court. If the chief eunuch, he's going to bring people in to do what he does, what might he do to the people who are going to work under him? Make them eunuchs. Maybe. There's at least the assumption that might be what's going to happen. And some of the people are from the royal family, or in Hebrew, the seed of the kingdom. Are we waiting for a seed in the Bible story? Yeah, Genesis 3:15. The seed of the woman will crush the seed of the snake. The word offspring in the Bible is the word seed. And here the word seed is showing up. This whole story has been a story of waiting for the seed of the woman who's going to come and defeat the source of evil. And we know that was going to come through the family of Abraham, through this nation of Israel, specifically through the line of David. Yeah, David, who's from the tribe of Judah. Yeah, so we're waiting for someone from the line of Judah, from the line of David, someone from the royal seed to come and to be the one that we're waiting for. Someone who is righteous and blameless, and someone who defeats evil and who is faithful. So these people that he's told to bring, they're going to be youths without blemish. Youths without blemish. It's a strange way to talk about kids. What is usually talked about as not having blemish? The sacrificial lambs or the atoning lambs. So the first description is that they're youths without blemish and that they're of good appearance. They're really handsome. Like, is Nebuchadnezzar creepy, or what's going on here? You know, why is he being described as good of appearance? Can we think of anyone else in the Bible who's been described as good appearance? David, yes. Solomon. They liked the way he looked, but he wasn't Tov Me'er. He wasn't good in appearance. Not Saul. We just said that one. Yeah. But David, Solomon, David's sons, Esther. Remember, she was described as being good of appearance. And the first one in the Bible is Joseph. What happens to Joseph? Like 30-second synopsis of his story.
Sold into slavery, lots of things happen, becomes prime minister over Egypt.
Yeah. So betrayed, thrown into a pit, exalted out of the pit, and then exalted as the one who's in command of all of a foreign court. He's exalted in a foreign court, and he's clothed with robes. They give him a ring. He gets a chain. So that story of Joseph, and what does Joseph do to get out of the pit? He interprets lots of dreams. Remember that whole story? Joseph has dreams, and then prisoners have dreams, and he interprets them. And then the king has dreams. King Pharaoh has dreams, and Joseph interprets them. And then he's exalted out of the pit, and he is established as second in command of all of Egypt. I wonder what Daniel's going to do in the book of Daniel. He's going to interpret a lot of dreams. Okay? So they're good of appearance, and they're also skillful in all wisdom. Skillful in all wisdom. And this word we first hear in Genesis chapter 3, verse 6, about the tree of knowledge. She saw that it was good to make her wise. So she desired to take it. But we also see it with the suffering servant. The suffering servant in Isaiah chapter 52, verse 13. Behold, my servant shall act wisely. It's the same Hebrew word. Shall act wisely, and shall be high and lifted up, and shall be exalted. You know, Daniel in this book, he's called a servant of God. And is Daniel going to suffer in some unique ways? Yes, he is. And he's going to be exalted and high and lifted up. It's also a phrase that's used about Joshua when Joshua is being introduced, that he's going to prosper is the way it gets translated there. But Joshua is one who is skillful. And then David. The description of David is that he is skillful like this. So we're getting set up to think of Daniel in all of these ways, like an atoning lamb, like Joseph, and like Esther, who's also exalted in a foreign court to save her people, or like David, like Solomon. The youths are also endowed with knowledge, understanding, learning, and competence to stand in the king's palace. I'm guessing they're just like good at standing straight, I don't know, good posture. And to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. Chaldean is another word for Babylon. So Chaldean, Babylonian, those are synonymous terms. So they're going to be taught the language of Babylon, which is Aramaic. The king assigned them daily portions of food that the king ate and of wine that he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years. 3 years, and at the end of that time, they were to stand before the king. Among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. So the whole story is about descendants of Judah. And we're waiting for descendants of Judah to be the faithful one to bring about salvation for the people. So they rename them. They give them Chaldean or Babylonian names. And then they're going to give them food and they're going to teach them for 3 years. But Daniel put it on his heart that he would not defile himself with the king's food. So they were probably eating food that was not kosher to Torah law. So it's not that he's like, it doesn't really fit my macros, or I'm on the hard 70 workout, or like the whole 30 thing. It's not just a dietary. These are all diet jokes. See, we're not into diets these days. All right, so he's not saying that I just don't like the food. He's saying I'm not going to break Torah. He's resolving. He's putting it on his heart. I'm going to be faithful to Torah commands and not eat the things that I'm commanded not to eat. God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief eunuchs. It's the same thing that's said of Joseph in Genesis 39. The Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. So we have a little copy and paste out of the Joseph story. And the chief eunuch's like, look, man, if you don't eat this food, you're going to get skinny and malnourished, and I'm going to get in trouble because the king put me in charge of taking care of you. So Daniel's like, look, okay, how about you give me the food, just let me have the vegetables. That's the only thing that you're offering me to eat that I'm actually allowed to eat. We'll eat those for 10 days and just keep an eye on us. For 10 days, test us. Make sure that we're looking good. And at the end of 10 days, you make your decision. He's like, all right. So he gives them vegetables instead of giving him like the pork loin. And then they're eating vegetables, and lo and behold, they become better in appearance. They become like fattier than the other people who had been brought into the house. This is not a text saying, you know what God really wants you to do? He wants you to eat vegetables. God is opposed to you eating meat. The thing that will make you healthy is eating your broccoli. No, don't do that. That is not the interpretation. This is a miracle that's taking place. It is amazing that they eat only vegetables and they get healthier. That's the miracle of this text. God is being faithful. He's showing favor to Daniel by taking care of him and providing so that he doesn't have to defile and break Torah. So this is not a text telling you to eat only vegetables. It is a text showing the faithfulness of God to faithful Daniel. So at the end of 10 days, they're better in appearance. God has done miraculous things because we know that in Romans, the weak eat only vegetables. That is in the Bible. Okay, it's very funny. We'll get there. So as for these four that you're going to hear about in this rest of this book, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. I wonder if visions and dreams are going to be important in this book. And maybe. And Daniel is really good at visions and dreams. At the end of the time, at the end of those 3 years, so we just, in one verse, we just fast forwarded 3 years in time. At the end of the time when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king spoke with them, and among all of them, none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they stood before the king, and in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found 10 times better than all of his magicians and his enchanters in the kingdom. And Daniel was there until the first year of King Cyrus. So 605, he's being trained for 3 years, so that takes us to 603, 602. And then King Cyrus, 539. Long time that Daniel is there for. So Daniel is there for all of exile. And that's what we're going to read about in the following chapters. There's chapter 1. That's our introduction. Yes?
So are we supposed to think that they were the only ones who were faithful? I mean, they just got taken into exile because they were disobedient and not loving God, and yet Daniel and his friends proved to be exactly what God would. So is that what we're supposed to think? And the rest of the ones that got taken in went ahead and ate the barbecue and lived it up and were like, we're going to make this our home.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe. They are definitely faithful, or at least presented as that. And Ezekiel and Job are commentaries on that. Like, well, what about the righteous ones who suffer? And remember there was that ongoing conversation, I think it's Ezekiel 14, where he keeps mentioning Job, Daniel, I think a different Daniel than this, but Job, Daniel, and Noah, about how even with their righteousness, like they would not have been spared this disaster. They would have gone through exile as well. So exile was this corporate punishment that even the righteous remnant goes through. But there's also this faithful promise throughout Scripture that God will not let exile destroy the remnant. They're going to be like a stump. It's cut down and then burned, but that stump remains. And from the stump comes this little offshoot of Jesse. So I think they really are faithful. I don't know if they're the only ones. There might have been like this whole like cohort of the royal seed who are like, we're in this together. And maybe the story's just highlighting 3. Or they were the only ones. And you're like, damn. Well, they're from the family of...
Yeah, but we don't read about Daniel.
It's true. But they are from the family of David, like this big family. And we have like Jehoiakim who's exalted. And so there is the seed still there. And I think they're just a picture of the seed. Yeah. Yeah.
Those are just nobles, not the priests.
Yep. Yeah, and they're gonna the priests are gonna get taken later in exile.
But still,
Yeah.
they were nobody faithful except for who became eunuchs.
Yeah.
Tough to
Yeah.
figure out how to get that.
Yeah. Yeah. So there are definitely people who are faithful. And Jeremiah's faithful, Ezekiel's faithful. There are faithful people in exile.
Why do we know Daniel by his true name?
Yeah. Daniel seems to be the focused figure of faithfulness. Daniel's awesome. You cannot find a single character flaw of Daniel. So throughout the Bible, we've been hoping for and anticipating someone who can represent the people. someone who can intercede for the people, someone who can be a substitute for the people. And we get close sometimes. Like someone like David, when he intercedes because of his own sin, he intercedes for the people. Or like Moses on Mount Sinai, when the people are sinning, and he says, you know what, instead of killing all of them, kill me instead. Let me atone for their sins. Like we're waiting for someone like that. And Daniel's as close as we have gotten so far. He is righteous. He's blameless. He's wise. And what we're going to see in chapter 9 is he prays and he intercedes for the people, and he counts himself among them. He confesses our sin. But throughout the book, you're like, this guy has no sin. Like, he's shown as being blameless, you know? But something's still missing. It's like Daniel is as close as we get, but something is still missing. I don't know if that answered your question. Like, why is... And because of that, I think Daniel is always referred to as his Hebrew name, which means God is my judge. Yeah. The other ones, I don't know why they don't get stuck with their Hebrew names. When we get to chapter 7, there's going to be a figure like a son of man who's a representative figure. And I think as the story goes, we're supposed to be like, oh man, it's going to be someone like Daniel. And we're supposed to slowly compare those people together. The image of one like a son of man and then Daniel himself. So I think that's why it happens like that. Okay, chapter 2. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. He has a dream. He wakes up in the middle of the night. He's like sweaty and breathing heavy. He's like, oh, what the heck was that? So what he does is he gets all of his sorcerers together. And what he doesn't do is he doesn't tell them his dream. Because they probably have like these books. You know, in the book it's like, if you dream about a cow, that means you're going to prosper. And if you have a dream about a desert, that means you're going to... So he doesn't tell them the dream. He doesn't want just like the default answer. He says, how about this? You tell me my dream, and then tell me what my dream means. And no one can do it. They're like, you're asking of way too much from us. So what King Nebuchadnezzar does is he's like, well, you know what? If you can't do it, I'm going to kill all of you. Everyone who works for me, I'm just going to kill. And then Daniel finds out about this. He's like, whoa, bad news for me, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, because we all work for the king. Like, we're all magi, basically. Like, they are magi in the court's chambers. So he's like, we should probably do something about this. So they pray. They pray to God. And Daniel is asking God to make known the dream to him, and God answers. And God does reveal the dream to Daniel. So then Daniel goes in and he says, King Nebuchadnezzar, God has revealed to me your dream and its interpretation. This is not my skill that is doing this. This is God himself revealing to you what your dream means. So starting in, let's see, I think. Okay, so starting in verse 31, you have the dream, and then you have the interpretation of the dream. So these are great chapters because it is hard to mess them up. If you arrive at a different interpretation of the dream, you have misread the chapter because the chapter tells you what the dream means. So you saw, O king, and behold, a great image, a stellum, a statue, the same thing that humans are in Genesis chapter 1, made in the image of God, the stellum of God. So you saw this image. In this image, the statue was exceedingly bright, and it stood before you, and the appearance of it was frightening. The head of this image was fine gold, its chest and arms silver, the middle and thighs bronze, its legs iron, and then the feet were kind of iron and kind of clay. There was a little mix going on. And as you looked, a stone cut by no human hands, maybe like a meteor falling out of the sky, or maybe a volcano erupts and a rock falls, something that someone didn't cut out of the ground. A stone cut by no human hands struck the image at its feet of the clay, and it broke it into pieces. Then that little rock slowly grew into a great big mountain that filled the entire earth. The end. That's your dream. Okay, here's what your dream meant, O king. You, O King of Kings, to whom God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the might, and the glory. Here's what your dream meant. You are the head of gold. See that in verse 38? You are the head of gold. Verse 39. Another kingdom inferior to you shall arise after you. and yet a third of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And there shall be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things. And like iron that crushes, it shall break and crush all these. And as you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom. So this fourth kingdom, over time, will kind of crumble and fall apart. Verse 44, and in those days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. So here's the dream. The dream of this wild statue that is super tall and has multiple medals. The interpretation of the dream is that it is kingdoms. First, the kingdom of Babylon. Then the question is the second one the Medo-Persian Empire, or do those count as two? Medo-Persians. So the Medes and the Persians. Do those count as one, or do those count as two? Then after them, anyone know who follows the Medo-Persian Empire in history? The Greeks. And then who follows the Greeks? The Romans. So it could be the Babylonians. We know that's the first one. Then it could be Medo-Persians, then Greeks, then the Romans. Or it's Babylon, then it's Medo, Persia, then Greece. So it's either Greece, the fourth kingdom is either Greece or Rome in this little story right here. Later, when we get to chapter 7, chapter 8, chapter 9, they're going to talk about the fourth kingdom again. And the question is it the same fourth kingdom as this chapter here, or is it a different one? But when we get there, it does seem to be talking about Greece in the order of history. But among this, God's going to intervene, and during the time of these kingdoms, he's going to establish his kingdom. That's that little rock that comes down, boom, builds into a giant mountain, starts as a rock, grows into a mountain that fills the whole earth, or like a mustard seed, then becomes the biggest tree of all the garden. Like, where does Jesus get his ideas of these parables, So that mountain is going to grow into a mountain that fills the whole earth. The hope of Isaiah 2, that the mountain of Yahweh will be exalted above all mountains, and that the plains will be leveled and the people will flow to Mount Zion. So that's what's being talked about here. So that's the dream. And Nebuchadnezzar is pumped. He fell on his face and he paid homage. I don't know why it gets translated like this. Probably just because we're uncomfortable with what's going on here. It's literally the word for worship. Nebuchadnezzar falls to his face and worships Daniel. He worships Daniel and commanded that an offering and incense be offered up to him. Daniel is getting worshipped. But then what does the king say in his worship? He says to Daniel, truly your God is God of gods and Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this mystery. So who is he actually worshiping? God. He's worshiping Yahweh. But it's like he's seeing Yahweh in Daniel. It's like when a human is faithful and in line with the Spirit of God, that someone sees God himself. It's like Daniel is the image of God. All right? So he's really thankful for Daniel. He worships Daniel. And then the story wraps up. The end. Next story. Chapter 3. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold. Where did he get this idea from? He makes a giant statue, just like it was in his dream. It's like he did not learn his lesson from that dream. So King Nebuchadnezzar made a giant golden statue. It was 60 cubits high, and its breadth was 6 cubits. A cubit is like 18 inches. So 60 cubits high, that's 90 feet tall. That's very, very tall. That's ridiculous. He makes this giant statue, and he set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. So he's in Babylon. He's in the plain. And what was this land called in chapter 1? Shinar. Remember the plains of Shinar, Genesis chapter 11. Now they're in the plains of Babylon, plains of Dura, and he sets up this giant statue. Then the king sent to gather the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, and the justices, and the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image. In other words, all the representatives of all the nations. He's going to bring them together. So all the nations are going to be gathered together in one spot. And then they set up and they proclaim this aloud. You are commanded, O peoples, nations, languages. The entire world is gathered back together in the plains of Babylon. Just like in Genesis 11, where all the nation that became nations were gathered together. And when you hear the king play his awesome rock music, then you will all fall to the ground and worship the golden image. The same thing that King Nebuchadnezzar just did to Daniel. He's like, man, you know, yeah, I just did that to Daniel, but hey, could you all do that to me? Like, that's what the king does. It's the exact same phrase as we just saw in the last chapter. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning, fiery furnace. So then they play the rock music, and all the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshipped the golden image, except for a few dudes who were standing in the crowd. At that time, when the king declared this, there was a few people who did not bow down. Verse 11. There are certain Jews. You guys notice that they're called Jews now in the Bible? A little sidestep. Usually they're called what? Hebrews or Israelites. Now they're called Jews. So what's happened in human history is the Northern Kingdom got exiled in what year? 722 BC. And then what exists from 722 to 605 is just the Southern Kingdom, which is comprised of the tribe of Judah, Benjamin, and some Levites. Judah was predominantly the bigger region. And what was the Southern Kingdom called? Judah. And they get exiled in 605, so they get referred to as the people of Judah or Judahites or Jews. So Jew comes from the name Judah. So that's why we don't, when we're reading through the Old Testament, we don't call them Jews, we call them Israelites. But after exile, they are called Jews because they're all people who stem from the nation of Judah and from the people group of Judah. So Jews is specifically referring to the people that exist after exile that stem from the nation and the tribe of Judah. That's why they're called that today. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Nebuchadnezzar was pissed. He was furious. And he calls those guys in and he brought them before him. And Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, "Is this true? Are you not worshiping me? Do you not serve my gods or worship my golden image that I have set up? Now, I'm going to give you one more chance. When you hear my rock music play, you better bow down, you better worship, and everything will be well and good with you. But if you don't worship, then I'm going to throw you into the burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will save you, who will deliver you out of my hands? Who can save you from my hands?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "Oh, Neb, we have no need to answer you. We don't have to give you a response in this matter. If this be so, if you do decide to throw us into the fiery furnace, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." This is the most baller response in the Bible. They say, one, we don't have to answer you. We don't need to give you the dignity and respect of an answer. But we will anyways. Here's our answer. One, our God can rescue us, and our God will rescue us. And even if he doesn't, we're going to trust him and serve him over you. That is his response. So our God can, our God will, and if not, we trust him anyways. That is their response. So Nebuchadnezzar was pissed, and he expressed it on his face. He's like, "Arr!" And he charged against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I'm like, okay, is he like rushing them? Like he's going to try to tackle them? He charged them? I don't know. Maybe he wants to fight. A little bit of fisticuffs. Just trying to make sure you're tracking. You guys with me still? All right. So what he does, he tells the fire keepers, he's like, crank it up to number 7, make it way hotter than it normally is. And then they take them, they don't even give them the time of taking like their coats and their top hats off. They bind them up in ropes, they bring them over, and then they're going to throw them into the fire. Because the king's order was urgent and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So the guards who are actually bringing them to the fire and about to throw them in, they don't even get in. They just get close enough to the fire and they die. Like, that's how hot this fire is. They get a little too close and they get burned up. They throw them into the fire, and the king was astonished, and he rose up in haste, and he declared to the counselors, didn't we throw 3 guys in there? And they're like, this is true, king. We threw 3 guys in there. And he answered and said, but I see 4, and they're unbound, and they're walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods, or like a son of God. Throughout the book of Daniel, you'll see son of the gods or spirit of the gods. But in the Hebrew Bible, the word God is a plural word anyways. So you can just translate that as God. I think that would be a better way to translate this. The reason why I think they're translating it as a plural is because they're putting it in, it's words from the mouth of Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar is a pluralist. He believes in many gods, not just one. So he's saying, one like the gods is among them. But this is a Hebrew book written by a Hebrew. So I think what he's saying is, there seems to be one like a son of God in their midst. So Nebuchadnezzar comes near and he says, servants of the Most High God, servants who are going to act skillfully and then be high and lifted up. Isaiah chapter 52, verse 13. He says, come out of the fire. And they came out, and he realizes the fire had no power over them. And then what Nebuchadnezzar does is he blesses God because God had sent his angel to deliver them, to save them. And they trusted in their God over the king. And they were willing to give up their bodies to the point of death. Therefore, he makes a decree to all the peoples and nations and languages that are gathered there in the plains of Shinar, that they should have reverence for God, and that they should respect the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. They come out and they're exalted. Thrown into death, exalted in new life and status. The end. That's the story.
John, can I bring something up here?
Yeah.
That a lot of times, when we're talking about building trust, faith, God, right? They use this story
Okay.
that they trust God, they believe in God, they faith in God. And many of them, I don't know if they have a word of knowledge about God, but human logic, you're getting ready to put me into a furnace.
Mhm.
This looks scary.
Mhm.
By that idea.
Mhm.
But they believe in God. They went ahead and went ahead and stepped in or allowed themselves to grow
Mm-hmm.
and like this, thinking of the whole our faith walk that let's not work on scenarios close out and it's close.
Mm.
There's a certain fear, but choosing rather to just put our faith step forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and we could wrongly apply this chapter to that very process of our own life, or we could rightly apply it. The wrong way to use this passage for our everyday walks into the furnace would be to say, if you just trust God enough, the furnace won't destroy you. I think that's a wrong application of this text. Because they say, God can deliver us, we believe he will, and if not, we're going to trust him. They're willing to go into the furnace even if it destroys them, knowing that God is still good. So going into your daily furnaces, it might kill you. Like, it might actually destroy you, and yet God is still good, and you can trust him anyways. Yeah. Great question. Where's our boy Daniel at? Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, Daniel's not mentioned in this chapter, and then Daniel in the lion's den, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego aren't mentioned. So it seems like these 4, they're exalted as satraps over provinces. During this time, Maybe Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are there in the story because they are rulers of provinces, and they've been brought together for this event, and that's why they're like out there when it's happening. It seems like Daniel is the satrap of the province of Babylon, so he's always at the courts, the king's court, and he's there. So maybe that's why he wasn't out in the plains, and maybe he was in the court chamber, or the king's chamber type of thing. Yeah, I don't know. But they're mere stories. You know, chapter 1 sets you up for the whole group, and then you get a story about the friends, the boys, then you get a story about Daniel. All right, next story. King Nebuchadnezzar to all the peoples and nations, and these 3 verses right here in the Hebrew text, in the Aramaic text, these are actually a part of chapter 2. So this is kind of like the culmination, the finish of this story, where he makes this decree to everyone about how great God is. God the Most High, how great are his signs and his mighty works. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion endures from generation to generation. That's like the refrain of this book, is how God has a kingdom that will never end. Do I remember any biblical texts or promises about a kingdom that will never end and will be forever? 2 Samuel chapter 7. Yeah, the Davidic covenant. The promise to David that one of his descendants will sit on the throne forever. And then we have Isaiah chapter 9, verses 6 and 7, and Isaiah chapter 11, and Isaiah chapter 32 about this son of David who's going to rule in righteousness and justice and peace, and those are all going to get picked up. So he has a wild dream. Again, Daniel shows up. Daniel interprets it. And the dream is about how, hey, look, Nebi, you've become arrogant. You think that you're the one who established this kingdom. You're claiming that you built this kingdom when really God is the one who has given this authority and dominion to you. And if you don't humble yourself, God will humble you and make you humble. God ultimately humbles him and turns him into a beast. He eats the grass, and his hair grows like feathers, and he has like talons. And the chapter is giving this picture of what happens when humans don't recognize and acknowledge God as the one who is sovereign and in control. When we seize autonomy for ourselves, we actually dehumanize ourselves and we become beasts. So when we trust God, we actually become more fully human of what it means to be human. But when we deny God, we become beasts and we act arrogantly and pridefully with other people. We're not going to read this one. Then there's another chapter, the very next chapter. It's about the Belshazzar. Now, Belshazzar is not like the immediate son of Nebuchadnezzar. He's like great grandson and then cousin or something like that of Nebuchadnezzar. But son and father can be used to talk about the one who proceeds from, or like your, what's it called when you're like the next person in line, the one who takes over? A successor. A successor. Yeah. So the phrase father and son can be used for successor as well. And Belshazzar does not humble himself. It does not go well with Belshazzar. So he gets killed. The end. The end of his story. And that's when Darius the Mede, who most scholars agree Darius the Mede is the throne name, the first year enthronement name of King Cyrus, the Persian. Then chapter 6 is about Daniel in the lion's den. It mirrors that story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You know, there was people who just really didn't like Daniel, but they realized that they couldn't find any accusation against Daniel. They could find no ground for complaint or any fault because he was faithful. And no error or fault was found in him. They were frustrated, they didn't like him, but they couldn't find a fault in him because he was faithful. So the thing that they decided to do is that, the only way we're going to get Daniel is if he has to be faithful to his God over being faithful to the king. That's how we'll trick Daniel. So they just said this whole ploy about, hey, king, welcome to being king of your kingdom. You should set up like an inaugural 30-day worship of you since you're the king, where people just take a break from worshiping their gods and they worship you as the new king just for 30 days, and then we'll go back to normal. So they set that up, and Daniel does not do it. He still worships God the way he used to do before by going into his room, opening the door, praying 3 days by facing out towards Jerusalem, and he prays. And because of this, he's thrown into the lion's den. And hear how it's phrased in verse 13. Then they answered and they said before the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you. It was the same accusation of the friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They paid no attention to you, O king, or the injuncture that you have signed, but make his petition 3 times a day. So their accusation against Daniel is the same accusation against the friends, that you're not paying attention to the king. He's brought to the lion's den. The king declares to Daniel, may your God whom you serve continually deliver you. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar said to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who is your God who can deliver you? And now King Cyrus, he's like, may your God who you serve, may he deliver you. So it's the same phrases going on. And Daniel is delivered from the lion's den because God sent his angel. Just like God sent his angel into the fire. And he's saved because he was found blameless. Remember, he's a blameless person. Then King Darius, he makes a decree. And his decree is about how God is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end, an eternal, never-ending kingdom. Just like that rock, hewn not by hands, crashes in, and then becomes a mountain. Oops. All right, now we get to the good stuff. Chapter 7. Saddle up. If you time to put the seatbelts on, because we're going to get wild. So now we're going back in time, because we were just in the reign of Darius the Mede, throne name of Cyrus, so 538. But now we're going back into the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, that one who died in chapter 5. Daniel had his own set of dreams and visions as he lay in his head. And he was really confused because he didn't really know what he saw. Here's what he saw. He saw 4 great beasts come up out of the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. A second one like a bear. It raised its head and it had some ribs in its mouth because it's been eating people, devouring people. After this, behold, another, like a third one, like a leopard with 4 wings of a bird on its back, and the beast had 4 heads. Dominion was given to it. And after that one, in the night visions, I saw a 4th beast. It was terrifying, dreadful, and exceedingly strong. And it had iron teeth. Remember, the 4th part of the statue was made of iron? So now this 4th beast has these iron teeth. And it devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. So it's crushing all these people that were being devoured. And then from this beast, it was different from all the other ones because it had 10 horns. And I was looking at the horns, and behold, there came among them another horn, a little one, just a little guy, sprouted out, and before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, it was a horn with eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. So we're going to draw this. I'm just kidding. Could you imagine, though? So a pretty crazy dream he's having so far. The dream continues. As I looked, thrones, plural, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. He sees a vision of God in his courtroom, and God takes a seat, and there's a ton of empty thrones around God. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flames. Its wheels were burning fire. Remember burning wheels that were carrying a throne? Ezekiel Chapter 1. A stream of fire issued and came out from before him. 1,000 thousands served him. That's a way of talking about angelic beings in the Bible. And 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were open. So the divine court, he's seeing the divine courtroom. And God is sitting there with the books, the sovereign books of human history. And I looked then because of the sound of the great words of the horn that was speaking. Remember that horn with all the eyes? And as I looked, the beast was killed, and its body destroyed and given over to be burned with fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. In other words, those dreadful, terrible, scary beasts, yeah, God just kills them, like wipes them out, destroys them. But then there's like some after effect where they're dead, but they still kind of exist. And it's over. I saw in my night visions and my dreams, and behold, the clouds of heaven, with the clouds of heaven, there came one like a son of man, someone who looks like a human. And he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, just like God's kingdom throughout this whole book, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. So the entire world will serve this Son of Man. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, just like in 2 Samuel chapter 7, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. And then I woke up. That's the dream. So he's having this dream at nighttime. He woke up and he's super anxious. He's probably sweating. And he said, my head was alarmed. I was alarmed. Like, what does this mean? So I approached one of those who stood there and asked him the truth concerning all these things. Like maybe this like angelic interpreter or maybe one of his boys. We don't know. It's just someone is there with him as he wakes up. And he's like, hey, I just had a dream. What does it all mean? So he told me and made known to me the interpretations of the things. So if you're wondering what that dream meant, here it is. These 4 great beasts are 4 kings who shall arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, forever and ever. That's the interpretation of that wild dream he just had. The 4 beasts represent 4 kings, 4 kingdoms that will arise from the earth. What did they arise out of in the dream? The sea. They emerge out of the sea like these crazy monsters in like a Godzilla movie. So the sea represents the earth, the nations, and then the beasts are these kings and kingdoms that will arise, just like Nebuchadnezzar's dream about the statue that had these 4 parts, and it was 4 different kingdoms. Verse 18, the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, forever, and ever. Who possessed the dream? Who possessed the kingdom in the dream? One like a son of man, who's exalted to the Ancient of Days, presented to him, and then is given dominion and glory in the kingdom. So the Son of Man in the dream is a representative figure for the saints of the Most High, the people of God. So remember, in the dream there was thrones, plural. There's thrones. And the Son of Man is a representative figure for the people. And just like the Son of Man is exalted to the Ancient of Days and given the kingdom, well, he's a representative figure of the people of God who are going to be exalted and given the kingdom and given dominion with God. But he's still curious. He's like, but you know, that 4th beast was pretty weird. Could you tell me more about the 4th beast? So he's like, yeah, sure. Let me tell you more about the 4th beast. Verse 21. As I looked, this horn made war with the saints and prevailed. We should start a little bit earlier. Let's just start from verse 19. I desired to know more about the 4th beast, which was different from all the rest, exceedingly terrifying. It had teeth of iron, claws of bronze, and it devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet, and about the 10 horns that were on its head. The other horn that came up before, and the 3 of them that fell out, the eyes and the mouth that spoke, and it seemed greater than its companions. This horn, it made war with the saints and prevailed over them. Remember, it was smashing what was left. So that is in his dream, the beast, the 4th beast, or the king, the kingdom, is making war with the people of God and destroying them. It seems to be prevailing over the people of God until the Ancient of Days come and gives judgment on them. And then verse 23 on is an interpretation of this 4th beast. So if you're wondering about the 4th beast, here is what it is. There's going to be a 4th kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all other kingdoms. It's going to devour the whole earth. It's going to trample it down and break it in pieces. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom, 10 kings shall arise. Seems like they're ruling at the same time. And another shall arise after them, and he shall be different from the former ones, and shall put down 3 kings. He shall speak words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and shall think to change the times and the law. And they shall be given into his hand for a time, times and a half a time. I think times there should be 2 times. So time, 2 times, and half a time. The word shanim is times, like plural. Shanayim, you could pluralize, you could make it dual. So time, 2 times, half a time, which equals 3.5. But the court shall sit in judgment, and his dominion shall be taken away, to be consumed and destroyed in the end. The kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heavens shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. His kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominion shall serve and obey him. That's again talking about the Son of Man. Here's the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts greatly alarmed me, and my color changed, and I didn't talk to anybody about it. The end. That's how the chapter ends. Okay, so we know what the dream means, right? We have an interpretation in this chapter. We know that the beasts are kingdoms. They're nations that are going to rise up and succeed one another. And the fourth one is going to be a kingdom that brings about great terror and destruction on the people of God. So in the first dream that we read, chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar, what is Nebuchadnezzar's dream? Who is the first kingdom? Babylon. Babylon, then Medo-Persia, then Greece, then Rome, or it's Babylon, Medo-Persia, then Greece. What we can often do is we either don't read the actual interpretation of it, we just read the story and then we try to interpret it on our own. Or what we do is we try to ignore everything else in the rest of the book and we try to jump out into the future and say, what does this mean for us now? And we're trying to figure out, well, maybe these 10 horns are these 10 presidents that we've had who weren't really great, but then we had this president who was pretty great, but he didn't really like the Jewish people. We're trying to do something that the book isn't designed to do. The book actually has set us up for success. But first, this Son of Man figure, he's a representative of the people of God who's going to get crushed by the beast, by the nations, but then is going to be exalted up on the clouds to the Ancient of Days. This is Jesus' favorite phrase for himself. Jesus constantly refers to himself as the Son of Man. He is making a direct reference to the book of Daniel. What happens to Jesus? He gets trampled. He gets crushed by the nations. Not just the Jewish people, but also the Romans. They trample him to death, but then he's exalted. And he's taken up on clouds. And he's seated at the right hand of God. And Jesus represents all of us. So as the Son of Man, he is the one who is trampled, and then he is resurrected, and he's exalted to God Most High, and he represents us before God. And that's why in Ephesians chapter 2, Paul can say that we have been raised and enthroned with Christ in the heavenly places. You're seated on the thrones, reigning with Jesus right now. That's a reality because he is our representative. Okay, but let's keep talking about these 4 kingdoms and the beasts because we're going to get more clarity as we keep going. So in chapter 8, we're not going to read this just because for sake of time, but he's going to have another dream, and it's about these 2 animals. He's going to have a dream about a goat that has 2 horns, and then about a ram that has 2 horns, and then about a goat that's going to have 1. And we're told in this chapter that, let's see, the ram with 2 horns is the Medo-Persian Empire. We're told that in this chapter somewhere. Oh, yes. As for the ram that you saw with the 2 horns, these are the kings of Media and Persia. So the ram that he sees with the horns are symbolic of kings throughout the Old Testament. The ram is the Medo-Persian Empire, and then the goat is the king of Greece. So the goat represents the Greco Empire. And then he begins to talk about the Greco-Roman Empire, and it matches on really well to everything about Alexander the Great, who was very successful and expanded the empire of Greece across the known world. And then when he died, his 4 ruling generals split up and divided the kingdom. And it was these 4 provinces of Greek. And that is what's described in this chapter, in chapter 8, is that one little horn, which is Alexander the Great, when he's broken off, it's divided into 4. So the question is then, is this about the 3rd and the 4th kingdoms? Or is it about the 2nd and the 3rd kingdoms and there's still a 4th to come? In chapter 9, he prays because he starts off and he's like, man, how much longer? It's in the first year of Darius, which is 539 BC. Darius is the throne name of Cyrus for the first year. So he's been in exile now for like 67, 68 years. And he's sitting there, he's reading his Bible, and he's reading the book of Jeremiah that says it's going to be 70 years of exile. And he's wondering, how much longer is this going to take? Is this it? Are we about to see it? And he also knows, because he's a good Bible student, he reads Jeremiah, he reads Deuteronomy, he reads Leviticus. He knows that the return from exile is dependent on the repentance of the people. So then what he does is he prays a prayer of repentance, because he knows that is what's required for the restoration to come. But it's all stemming from him wondering, is this it? Is this going to be the end of exile? Are we going to return home? And remember, exile 70 years in the book of Jeremiah. And then he gets his answer. An angel shows up and he gives him some good news, bad news. Good news, Daniel, you are so loved. You're so loved. Bad news, it's going to be a little bit longer than you thought. And here is one of those passages that often gets taken. Charts are unfolded, maps are made, but here's what's going on in this. We'll just read through it slowly. 70 weeks. The word weeks is just the word 7. 7 can refer to week. 7 can refer to a different unit of 7. What did 70 refer to in the book of Jeremiah? Years. So now it's 77s. And I think it's better to understand it as years. One, because there's not the word week, it's just the word for 7 here. But also throughout the book of Leviticus, Leviticus 26, 18, 21, 23 through 24, 27 through 28, are these laws that if the people continue in their sin, that God's judgment will be multiplied by 7. It will be multiplied by 7. So here, exile was supposed to last for 70 years. When we read through Ezra Nehemiah, is exile really over? No, they're still slaves in their own land. So exile doesn't actually end. It gets multiplied by 7. 77s are decreed about your people and your holy city. 70 times 7 is 490. Some people say 490 years. So instead of 70 years, it's going to be 490 years. Decreed about your people and your holy city, to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophecy, and to anoint a most holy place, or to anoint a most holy one. Know therefore and understand that from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem, to the coming of an anointed one, a prince, there shall be 7 weeks. Then for 62 weeks it shall be built again with squares and moats, but in a troubled time. What is 7 plus 62? 69, so we're 1 away from 70. And after the 62 weeks, which we're at 69 weeks, or 69 sevens, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war. Desolations are decreed. And he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, or 1 7. And for half of the 7 he shall put an end to sacrifices and offerings. And on the wing of abomination shall come one who makes desolate, until the decree end is poured out on the desolator. Pretty simple. You guys got it? Figured it out? All right, let's pray and go home. So there's a little clock that starts ticking when the word to restore and build Jerusalem goes out. So there's some questions there. Which word is that? And which word does it refer to? Does it refer to the prophetic word, like Jeremiah? Does it refer to the edict of Cyrus to go and rebuild the temple? Does it refer specifically to the building of just the city Jerusalem that happened by Ahasuerus when he sent back Nehemiah? For those who take the numbers and years to be like, this is a literal time clock and we can count the days down to a T, they'll take it to be the decree of Ahasuerus sending Nehemiah back. That happens in 445. From there, they'll do some finagling with calendars and say, well, not all calendars used to be 365. They actually used to be 360. So if you do that, even though our calendar system would take you a little bit past Jesus, if you take out those 5 days for those 490 years, really it brings you to the crucifixion of Jesus. The 70 years, though, of exile from Jeremiah is not to a T a literal 70 years. If we start at 605 or if we start at 586 BC, it's like really close for the return from exile, but it's not like an accurate to the T 70 years on the dot. So we think of time differently than they thought of time. And throughout the Bible, we know that 70 years is a symbolic number for the land that was needed to give rest. They didn't give it. We'll see that at the end of Chronicles. People were supposed to give the land rest. They didn't do it. So the exile lasts for as long as the land is required to have its Sabbath rest. So this Sabbath number is being multiplied now. 70 sevens is being multiplied by 7. And the judgment is coming out. Should we draw things or just keep talking? Can you track it as I talk? So in verse 25, from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem to the coming anointed one, a prince. Anointed one is the Hebrew word Messiah. Now, Messiah does not only refer to Jesus. It refers to all the kings and all the priests, right? All the way back in the Torah. The Messiah is an anointed one, which is a king or a priest. They're all anointed. They're all messiahs in a sense. So this might be referring to the Messiah that we're waiting for, Jesus, or a Messiah, the reestablishment of the priestly order or the reestablishment of a king. It might be one of those things too. It doesn't have an article, the anointed one. It's anointed one, a prince. And I think that's why at least ESV is translating it like that. Maybe anyone else have a translation that just says Messiah? I think maybe the King James just translates it Messiah. And then we think we're waiting for the actual Messiah. But from the going out of the word to restore to the coming of the anointed one, there shall be 7 weeks or 7 sevens. That'd be 49 years for that to take place. Then for 62 weeks or 62 sevens, it shall be built again with squares and moats, but in troubled time. Then at the end of that, there's going to be this little period of 7. And for half of it, it's going to be really horrible. And that 7 is where people get a 7-year tribulation, where half is horrible and then half is not so bad. But what's going to happen is as we keep reading this book, these events seem to better sync up both the 4 kingdoms and these dating years and the way it's described here in chapter 10 and 11 with the events that happen with Antiochus Epiphanes. So in the 160s, after the Medo-Persian Empire, then the Greek Empire comes in, and there's this guy, Antiochus Epiphanes. And what he does is he's in a struggle war for power, and he gets bitter and upset. And what he does is he goes into Jerusalem, he tears down a ton of the walls, and he builds his own fortress of protection. And then he says, you're not allowed to worship Yahweh anymore. Instead, you're going to worship Zeus Olympus. And he sets up a statue of Zeus in the temple. And then he doesn't let them celebrate Sabbath or perform circumcisions or celebrate festivals. And this happens for about 3.5 years. And what he also does is he goes into the temple and he would sacrifice pigs on the altar, an unclean animal, abomination of desolation. And that all culminates in what we know as the Maccabean Revolt. So if you read 1st and 2nd Maccabees, it's free online, or if you have a Catholic Bible, you can read it in there. The Maccabean Revolt is about Judas Maccabeus, and he's a high priest. So he's an anointed one, and he's revolting against Antiochus Epiphanes for about 3.5 years when they have this all set up. It's wild stuff, but we have in chapter 8, it's definitely talking about Greece. And then in chapter 10 and 11, there are clear things that are unfolding the events of Antiochus Epiphanes that, at least in chapter 10 and 11, scholars agree that is about Antiochus Epiphanes. And it's a prophetic commentary on real historic events that have taken place. So it's not looking forward to this future thing. It's things, at least for us, that have already happened. But remember how prophetic literature works, where it will intentionally not use someone's name so that it becomes a model or an example of future embodiments of that. Like Pharaoh in Exodus. You're never told who the Pharaoh was. In fact, there's multiple pharaohs in the book of Exodus. But Pharaoh becomes this archetype for human evil. Well, same thing here. It seems like it's referring specifically, if we're trying to nail it down historically, to Antiochus Epiphanes, and yet he's never named. Same thing with Alexander the Great, never named. And they become these little archetypes of human evil, just like Nebuchadnezzar, who exalted himself arrogantly and pridefully, and ultimately God humbled and exalted his own kingdom over. And that's why Jesus in the Gospels, he can be talking about his own day and the rulers of the temple system and the Roman Empire. And he can say, you know what, just wait for the abomination of desolation. Let the reader understand. Remember that verse in Mark? You guys know in the book of Daniel. He's like, that's what's going on again here too. Someone is exalting themselves arrogantly and pridefully, and God will humble them, and God will exalt his own kingdom. I know we're going a little long. Let me just jump to the end of the book, because I think it gives clarity for the rest of it. So we get to the end, and Daniel's having like one last dream and vision. And he's like, man, when will this happen? When will God finally bring about restoration? And he has this vision of this angelic being who's standing in between the waters with both hands lifted up. In the Old Testament, you make an oath or you swear by lifting a hand to heaven. And this one has both hands lifted up. So like this is a sure thing, an oath. He lifts up his hands and he swore by him who lives forever, by God himself, that it will be for time, 2 times, and half a time. And that when the shattering of the power of the holy people comes to an end, all these things will be finished. I heard, but I didn't understand. So here's this figure saying, it is a sure and definite thing that God will overthrow the evil rulers of this world and he will establish his eternal kingdom. And it's going to be for a time, half a time, or time, 2 times, and half a time. That's when it's going to happen. And Daniel's like, I still don't get it. So if you're like, I still don't get it, you're in good company. So then we get to the end, and the angel is, he's like, Daniel, actually, you should understand what I'm saying, though. Daniel wants to understand the timeline, but the angel says, you should understand what I'm actually saying to you. So then he begins to talk again. From the time that the regular burnt offering is taken away and the abomination that makes desolate is set up, there shall be 1,290 days, which if you divide that by 365 is about 3.5 years. Time, 2 times, and half time. Blessed is he who waits and arrives at the 1,335 day. That's how long it's going to take. It's going to be great if you can wait a little bit longer. But go your way till the end. So these last 2 numbers, you get what is a time, 2 times, and half a time in day count. But then you get a little bit longer than that. So I think here's how the book is concluding. There's lots of numbers in this book. You can spend lots of time making maps. And I think the conclusion is Daniel wants to know a chronology of time. When will God restore everything? And that's not the point. I don't think that's the point. I think the point of it is God will do this. So trust him and remain faithful in the face of persecution and suffering. Be like Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Go your way till the end. I think that's the point of this book. So will Jesus return and establish all things and have an eternal kingdom where there is no sin? Yes. Do we know exactly when in a chronological timeline? No. The Bible is clear about that, especially in the New Testament. We don't know exactly when, but we do know it will happen. And because of that, we can live faithfully now in the midst of our suffering, even as we're going into our daily furnaces. Right, Mike? Let me pray for us, and then let's go worship. Father, thank you for this morning, and thank you for your word, especially what we find in Daniel. God, you show us what human history is from your perspective. You show us the patterns that continue to unfold about arrogance and pride, and God, you are the one who humbles the arrogant and the proud, but God, you are also the one who exalts the humble. And we see that with Daniel, and we see that with his friends, and God, ultimately we see that in Jesus, that one who did not count on his own ways and was not arrogant, was not prideful, but God was humbled even to the point of death on a cross. You exalted and bestowed on him the name that is above all names. And God, we know that he will return as the king over his kingdom. We do not know when, but God, help us remain faithful until that day. We love you and we need you and pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.